Good evening, good evening, good evening, one and all. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to this somewhat interesting evening. Oh, I have to make sure I don't. Well, actually, no, that bizarrely works when I lean back. Good evening, one and all. One and all. Good evening, good evening, good evening. How are you all? I see dudes in the chat. Gerard von Adker is in the chat. Alexander's in the chat. Mysterious Mr. Mercurius is in the chat. G's in the chat. Big Wolf is in the chat. Prinny Bird's in here. Ben Shaw's in here. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Good evening, one and all. Cyrus Deshawn, welcome as well. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, one and all. Welcome to what I'm sure is going to be a fun evening for us. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun because already I see dudes asking the question, why am I covering Tim Pool? Why are we covering this? Well, we'll get to that in a bit. But first of all, who is Tim Pool, for those of you who don't know? Trust me, this article we're going to go through, we are going to find out who Tim Pool is. Trust me on that one. we are gonna find out who Tim Pool is. Oh, is my microphone? Oh, hang on, let me just check I've got the right. That'll be one.
There we go. There we go. Is that a bit better? Is that a bit better for you? Yep. Sorry, I'd forgotten that. I've got a new. Well, I've got sort of. Well, because of my new PC, I forgot to set up the right audio stuff. And for some reason, when I've turned my webcam on today, it's the mic of the webcam has overtaken this essentially. So we've switched it over to this now. So you should be. Everyone's saying it's much better. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So it's much, much better. Good, good, good. That's what we want. Excellent. Hello, hello, hello. This is London calling. London calling. Hello. So, yeah, welcome. Like I say, we are covering Tim Pool. For those of you who don't know who Tim Pool is, don't worry. This article will explain in great detail who Tim Pool is. So do not worry if you don't know who Tim Pool is, because there are people out there who don't know who Tim Pool is. Most of my friend group that I am friends with have no idea. It might be. Oh, I'm a pain to have. I think it's my internet. Oh, you think it's my internet that's gone all a bit skew-if? Yeah, I think it's my internet. Yeah, say I've got an unstable connection, which is really annoying. Oh. Say, soon your planet will be mine. Yeah, my video is also really shaky. Yeah, that's because unfortunately, I even though I have a green screen in effect, it's because of my my lighting. My lighting is a bit skew. If the picture gets really bad, then I'll just stop the cam. Essentially. But for those of you who are wanting to follow along with us, there is a link. Let me just. There is a link down below in the description box for the article if you want to follow along with us. It's in the bit.ly link. So if you want to click on that and follow along with us, or you want to read ahead, you're more than welcome to, by all means. But do stay around. Sit by the fire, warm yourselves. Like I say, I think this is going to be a fun evening where it's going to be, should we say, fun talking around the campfire about this. But I'm also just going to put a link to it in the chat as well. So really, is it my video? Is my video causing this? Oh, hold on a second. Watch it work fine now. Yeah, if it's my video causing this, then I'll just turn my video off. See if that works a bit. But anyway, we'll see how we go. We'll see how we go. But anyway, like I say, trust me, going through this article today, we're going to find out who Tim Pool is, because this literally chronicles his entire history from the start of his career right through to the very, very end. I'm annoyed now because I think it was my camera again still picking up the volume, even though it's not supposed to. Always the case for some reason. Always the case. The truest tech words that were always said. If you unplug the last thing you put in, it sounds much better. So, first of all, obviously, this article is from the Daily Beast. And to be honest, this is a really, really in-depth article. Really in-depth. And of course, you can see the title here, How Cowardly and Phony Tim Pool Became One of the Biggest Political YouTubers on the Planet. So we're going to dig in. I mean, literally dig in this article because I think it's incredibly good. I think the guy that wrote it, what's his name again? That's it. Robert Silverman is incredibly... did some incredible journalistic work. So absolutely top props to him for doing this. I think an article like this was a long time coming on Tim Pool. I think it's shocking that there hadn't been one already, but to say that he goes this in depth about it is absolutely incredible. So many of you might be wondering, why did I choose to do this on Tim Pool? Well, as we will find out later on, one of the articles, well, one of the news sources that Tim Pool constantly, and I mean constantly, talks about is the Daily Mail. Oh, wait a minute. I think I might know why it is. My Steam's downloading an update for something. That's what it is. That's what it was. A Steam all along. But yeah, one of the reasons why we're covering Tim Pool is because he constantly uses the Daily Mail of all things. Remember, he's an American. He's meant to be like an American newscaster type journalist person, or well, again, he's not. He'll say he's a commentator, but he constantly uses the Daily Mail, and I know, the Daily Mail is absolutely awful, absolutely awful in terms of the news it puts out, in terms of I'm going to pause that. There we go. So hopefully that should be a lot better now. Now I've turned that download off. Yeah, I hadn't realized that was a download. But yeah, if this is what Tim Pool is using as his journalistic integrity like standard to go forward and say, oh, it's the Daily Mail. This is the Daily Mail. This is what I want to do and cover. Yeah, I turned off Steam. Yeah. Yeah, because it turned out it was Steam all along. Yeah, Steam was downloading an update. So hopefully now that's much better for you all. But yeah, because he uses the Daily Mail, I find it sort of this comes into my wheelhouse because I am a UK politics guy. This is what I do. This is my wheelhouse. But when Tim Pool uses sources like the Daily Mail, or as we call it over here, the Daily Fail, then at that point, we know he really isn't the journalistic centrist that he casts himself as. Because if you wanted to use a more reputable news source, there are lots out there. I mean, Christ, he could be using the BBC. He could be using the BBC as his news source instead of the Daily Mail, but he's not. He uses the Daily Fail. So as a result, he is pretty much part and parcel. If you may remember a couple of years ago, the alt-right pipeline. So he does play a somewhat prominent part in many people's, shall we say, fall to the alt-right. But there you go. So we'll start into the article, but just, yeah. No, it was Steam. I can prove that it was Steam if you want me to. Although you'll probably all see my my games library. You'll see my secret shame. Let me see if I can share. Just to prove it was. Yes, there it is. So this is what I was downloading. I was downloading I was re-downloading Warhammer 2. As you can see, I've had to stop the downloads at like 90-odd%. But yeah. Coming soon. I've said in the future that we might do like a chill stream one day. I think we might do that one day. I think that might be quite fun, where we just sit down and we just play a bit of we play a video game and we just chat and chill on a Wednesday. That might be good. So let's jump into this article then, because don't worry if you don't know who Tim Pool is, because trust me, you will not need any further information, because this article goes pretty in depth about Tim Pool. So, a former darling of Occupy Wall Street, Tim Pool has racked up more than 1 billion views and millions in earnings while dangerously whitewashing the far right. And yeah, exactly. Like I say, Tim Pool is known for essentially having really far right figures on his podcast, and basically having absolutely no pushback. And that becomes a very dangerous point for many people, because Tim Pool likes to position himself as this disenfranchised liberal, or he's really center left. So when he has these far right people on, people get the idea that there's like that Tim is meant to be the left and he's representing the left in all this, but he's not. Tim Pool is anything but left wing. Trust me on that one. So By mid-afternoon on the 4th and the January the 4th, it had become increasingly clear that a slew of far-right actors were gearing up for violence at the Capitol. Tim Pool derided and dismissed that accurate reporting out of hand. Of all the ideological enemies of Pool, 35 rails against on YouTube for an audience of millions each day. Few actually stack up to the mainstream press. In his mind, coverage of the then President Donald Trump's instigations and the mounting threats was yet another example of the media's depravity, he said. What do you think they're going to do? Asked Paul. It's so stupid. Well, we know what we know what happened. We know what happened. There was a massive let me see if I can, there we go. There was a massive riot that took place at the Capitol. That's what happened. We know what happened. And even Tim Pool likes to deny that fact. I think he was very, very silent on the 6th, which says it all, to be honest. 2 days later, a mob stormed the Capitol, whipped into a frenzy by nonsensical claims of a stolen election, determined to put a stop to the constitutional transfer of power. To date, nearly 600 alleged rioters, a mishmash of Trump backers, QAnon adherents, and members of militias and extremist groups have been arrested. And to be honest, what happened on January the 6th, it's generally shocking. It really, really is. And if you want to watch something of just how close they actually came to literally getting a hold of like Nancy Pelosi or like people on Nancy Pelosi's staff or even senators, like there was literally a door, just a single door between the rioters looking for Nancy Pelosi's staff and on Nancy Pelosi herself, and literally the rioters could literally see the congressman. Like if you want to watch how close and how insane this could have been, you go watch the I think it's the Wall Street Journal, or is it no? It's either the Wall Street Journal or it's the New York Times. They did a fantastic video investigation into this, and they trawled through hundreds of thousands of different videos to put together an incredibly detailed and accurate timeline of what happened on that day. And it is shocking. It's the New York Times. Thank you very much. Yeah. Like I say, one day I think we might have to watch that just for clarity or just peace of mind, because I still can't believe how close they got. I mean, the Nancy Pelosi staffers, literally what happened, they hid in a room under a desk, and then they locked the two doors behind them. The rioters bust through the first door, and then when the second door was there, they saw the second door, and they didn't go through it. But imagine for a second what would have happened if they hadn't stopped that first door and they'd got those people who worked for Nancy Pelosi on her staff. Like, what would have happened to them? We know full well they brought zip ties. It doesn't bear thinking about what could have potentially happened to those people, let alone how close they came to Mike Pence and the nuclear football, which is even more shocking how close they came. Oh, But yeah, that is absolutely shocking. You are right, dude. They would have been taken hostage, but no clue about what to do with them. And that would have made them incredibly dangerous. Incredibly dangerous. Because these people stormed the White House with no clue as to what to do next when they got in there. But they got pretty far. And the fact that they got as far as they did is pretty shocking in itself. It really, really is. But anyway, we'll continue with this. So, throughout the fall of 2020, the wildly successful YouTube pundit has spent countless hours hyping the beleaguered legal strategies and the half-baked fantasies about voter fraud animating the online right. At the same time, in each video, Poole tried to separate himself from the hardcore conspiracy theorists. After all, he was just commentating on the news. That's what's really, really shocking about Tim Poole. That is his excuse. He's not a journalist. He's a commentator. So that's generally tends to be his excuse when he has these people on. Now, I'm a commentator, but if I did have someone on, like I've said before, I reached out to Dominic Cummings. If Dominic Cummings had actually said yes and it came on this channel, my God, I would be doing hours. I would be doing research and questions that I wanted to ask him non-stop. But Tim Poole does none of that. He does no research at all into what he's talking about. So, what Poole kept secret from his younger, overwhelmingly male, dedicatingly right-leaning audience during this time is that he seemed to have a pretty good idea what might happen on January the 6th. Dude, I've had messages from people saying that they've already got plans to rush DC as soon as November 3rd goes chaotic. Poole said back in early September during a recorded conversation reviewed by the Daily Beast. A few minutes later, Poole added, the right-wing militias, the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, and just the Proud Boys and Trump supporters, they are going to rush full speed to DC. They are going to take the White House and do whatever they can. And paramilitary. Poole made all these comments to then colleagues at the militia, at the media company he started. And of course, the following month, Poole used his own YouTube platform to say that the Oath Keepers had been unjustly smeared by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And he habitually comes to the defense of the Proud Boys as well. Again, for those of you who don't know, the 3%ers are a very, very radical militia group in America. These people believe that it was something like back in the War for American Independence, that it was only actually 3% of people who actually took up arms and fought in the Revolutionary War. So their whole idea is that they need essentially just 3% of the population behind them to enact another revolution. And again, in that New York, is it the New York? In that New York Times video investigation. In that very specifically, you can see Oath Keepers going through and surgically and using military training in the crowd to not only provoke other people in the crowd into violence, but they themselves were acting in a very, very pro-military manner. That is incredibly worrying. Not only that, but the Proud Boys were there as well, also performing huge problems there as well. I mean, this is one of the strange things. One of the first people to go up and actually approach the police and start going up against using the violence against them was a member of the Proud Boys. He was like the first person to actually go ahead and initiate violence on that day. And again, it's all in that video. And like I say, I definitely recommend and go and watch it. It's very, very enlightening, very, very worrying, and oh my word, very, very worrying. So, where are we? Anyway, we continue. So this glaring omission, however, was not out of character for Poole. Far from it. A former digital media journalist who originally built his name with on-the-ground reporting and live streaming, including stints at Vice and Fusion, Poole now postures as a rational centrist or a disenfranchised liberal who grew to loathe the excesses on the left. And this is Tim Poole's grift, essentially. That is his grift. He's a disenfranchised liberal. Of course, if you know who Dave Rubin is as well, Dave Rubin pulls this exact same grift as well. Except Tim Poole just does it a lot better, to be honest. So, if you buy Poole's branding, he stands in contrast to the bulk of his journalistic peers. The evil liars, he says, who supposedly capitulated to the agendas of Black Lives Matter, Antifa, Democrats, big tech companies, feminists, and the like. This self-generated mythology of anti-authoritarian truth teller, whose successives streamed from confronting the machine, as Poole puts it, bears little resemblance to the reality. Not surprised. Not surprised at all. Huff 2001, who is Tim Poole? Don't worry. We're learning about who Tim Poole is right now. Don't worry. This article goes heavily in depth. Like I say, if you want to read along, there is a bit.ly link in the description box below that will take you to the article. So, contrary to the overall manner in which Tim Poole portrays himself, he was not an intrepid field reporter and streamer who barreled into conflict zones filled with unshakable desire to ferret out the real story. Poole was at times reluctant to leave the safety of his hotel room, according to several of the nearly 30 former co-workers and other acquaintances from the past decade who have spoken to the Daily Beast. He'd come across as uninterested in interviewing subjects or even doing much research. What a surprise. He still continues that to this day. During shoots, Poole's head was frequently buried in his phone, diligently tracking social media, only to blame his co-workers or equipment when he couldn't live up to his clippings. Poole's main focus when reporting those on the ground with him said that he was drawing attention only to himself. He said, a coward and a phony, a joke, a staggeringly arrogant, totally full of not smart, and a bumbling doofus. I think that gets it across. I think that's how you get it across, definitely. But yeah, And like I say, the guy, the guy who wrote the article actually has audio recording of all of like Tim Pool's of these people saying this and saying this is what happened, and people saying, yeah, we'll go on the record, and other people backing up what these people are saying as well. So, like I say, top marks to this guy who wrote this article, because he has done some fantastic journalism on this. Honestly, absolutely fantastic journalism on this. So those are just a representative sample of those who worked with Pool at the digital media companies actually described him. Most did so on the condition of anonymity, and in some instances citing possible reprisals by Pool and harassment from his fans. Not surprising. Since then, Pool has discovered a style of commentary and an audience where a lack of knowledge or even journalistic skills might not prove to be an impediment to success. In some ways, incuriosity and incapability serve as valuable attributes in this medium, not solely because of the political valence, but thanks to, in part, how YouTube itself functions, rewarding the kind of high-profile volume, sensationalized, and sloppy churn Pool specializes in. Again, I have to agree. Like I say, YouTube, and not only just YouTube, but a lot of the social media companies have a lot to answer for when it comes to this type of social media nonsense. I mean, again, I'm not my speciality is, of course, UK politics, but I do, of course, keep an eye on what is going on in other countries as well. Very worryingly, in Italy at the moment, the remnants of the party that Mussolini led during his rise to power are currently ahead in the Italian polls. And they are attributing this success to social media. That is incredibly worrying. Incredibly worrying for what's going on in Italy at the moment. Like I say, to all my, Italian lefties out there, you have my support and absolute solidarity in what's going on there, my friends. You have my absolute solidarity in that. Anyway, it continues. And all of this has made Pool both exceedingly rich and one of the most watched independent YouTube political pundits in the country. Over 3.3 million subscribers, 1.5 billion views, and all, by all estimates, hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue per month. He earned over $600,000 just in August 2020 alone, and most of it came from his YouTube channel. Pool claimed in a recorded conversation. So that is a lot of money. A lot of money there. I mean, that is, there is a reason why Tim Pool has a media empire. And like I say, Tim Pool probably ain't going anywhere. There gets to a point on YouTube where if you reach a certain level, it just becomes almost self-sustaining. And I think YouTube, and I think Tim Pool's reached that. So, unlike his peers in conservative media, Pool was not boosted, shall we say, by the usual suspects. Neither the Koch brothers, the Mercer clan, nor any other deep-pocketed billionaires forked over seed money. And he didn't game the Facebook algorithms. Fox News has more or less ignored him, as has the institutional Republican Party and its network of well-funded think tanks. Now, right-wing and far-right figures, many of whom might not be welcomed on a platform to the left of Tucker Carlson tonight, not only have taken notice, they come to him. In 2020, continuing through to 2021, a rotating cast of Stop the Steal, a rotating cast of Stop the Steal activists, Capitol rioters, QAnoners, Pizzagate promoters, 9/11 truthers, grifters, anti-vaxxers, anti-Semites, misogynists, and cranks and neo-fascists all trundled down to Pool's Maryland podcast studio to appear on Timcast IRL, his 2-hour-plus YouTube live stream. There, Pool allows them to peddle their wares before a 6-digit audience and receive very little, if any, pushback. This should come as no surprise. Whenever a right-wing politician, personality, or group enters the news cycle, Pool finds a way to sand down their actual stated beliefs, or will just claim ignorance. This is just genuine. Like, yeah, this is just what happens. Or, to Tim Pool. This is Tim Pool's entire stick. And like I say, we're going to get into some stuff soon. Ooh. But like I say, already you saw the comments from his former co-workers. He's just like, okay. So business is booming per Pool, with over a dozen employees on his payroll since April, and a prominence made possible in no small part by YouTube promoting his work to its front page. I know for a fact, he said during a December 2020 live stream, the YouTube algorithm drives the majority of my content. At other times, he'll complain that YouTube is suppressing his content or will soon outright ban him. YouTube picks and chooses which content gets the views and which creators become famous, he told a Twitter follower. Apparently, they've chosen Pool. So for some time now, misinformation has proliferated, and even its merchants have thrived on YouTube, particularly on the right. Again, I've said it before, it's not just stuff on the right here that's a problem. There's so much medical nonsense over this. Like last time I told you about the black salve stuff. There are people on YouTube peddling that as a cure for cancer. There is an entire YouTube channel even, dedicated to something called the Gerson therapy, where they claim they can cure your cancer with coffee enemas. Yes. And yet YouTube does nothing about all this. His show should have been called The Deep End with Tim Pool. True. Oh yes, did you see a little side? Did you see Vosh on Tim Pool's show where he was debating Charlie Kirk? And Charlie Kirk decided to talk about put forward his anti-vax stance. And he absolutely got schlacked on it. Well and truly. Absolutely schlacked on it. It's well worth a watch. So, particularly on right, YouTube. 3 years ago, Pool's channel was included in studies about how YouTube serves as a radicalization vector, algorithmically leading viewers to seek out far-right creators and content. But his evolution indicates that YouTube just doesn't impact audiences. The money and fame radicalizes the creators too. That doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all that that happens. Doesn't surprise me at all. YouTube did not respond for a request to comment. Unfortunately, they never really do. I think they should. And we'll see how long YouTube can actually remain silent on this. They've remained silent so far, but I don't think they'll remain silent forever. The proof lies in his current output. Despite his continued insistence on being viewed as centre-left, the Daily Beast reviewed hundreds of hours of worth of Tim Pool's commentaries, revealed a consistent, if not broad, eschatology. I think that's how you say it. I've never come across that word before. Eschatology? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. No matter which ginned up atrocity is rolling in the online right on any given day, Pool will routinely deem it a critical sign pointing towards a civilization-ending crisis or imminent civil war. Sometimes he'll declare that a civil war is already underway. So who is to blame? Of course, a vaguely defined yet omnipresent and menacing left-wing other. Those of you who will know that, will know Tim Pool constantly calls that there is going to be some sort of revolution or civil war coming. He's constantly doing it. He's always doing it because he wants to do it. And this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you know anything about Alex Jones or David Icke, or you know anything about conspiracy theorists in general, then you will know that ever since 9/11 happened, Alex Jones pretty much almost called on a daily basis that there was going to be another terrorist attack. There's going to be another terrorist attack. And of course, eventually when there is one, then Alex Jones could turn around, see, I told you there was going to be one. So it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Jones has been saying it for like 6 years every day and nothing's happened, because eventually, just by the laws of probability, there will be one. So of course he can go, well, see, I told you so. That's what Tim Pool's doing here when he calls for a civil war, or should I say that there's a civil war about to happen. Yeah, that's right. If he tells you it's going to rain every day, eventually it will be right. Yeah, true. So, as a matter of course, Pool depicts people and groups on the left as a potential bomb-tossing radicals or even authoritarian lunatics, and cultural shifts or even gestures towards social and racial justice will lead to chaos and gulags, stocked with the victims of morality policing, like the McCluskeys, according to Pool. And if the police are now siding with the terrorists like BLM and Antifa, perhaps the time has come to flee the cities and stock up on firearms, as Pool himself has done. Of course, those of you who might not know, Pool went out and bought this massive compound, and that's where he now currently resides, in this compound, because in his mind he's preparing for this civil war. They will never stop coming. They will take your job away. They will come for your parents, Pool said in a very keyed up January 2020 live stream, lambasting those who wouldn't push back against the horde of woke cultists. You will do something wrong. They'll fire your mom. They will come after your house with fireworks and guns. And this is where it gets more fun. Poole recently hired a far-right extremist to run his website. And in private, he'll go beyond howling about civil war. On a few occasions, he's put it more explicitly. A race war is soon to come. So whenever basically Tim talks about a civil war, essentially what it is in reality, he's dog whistling. That's essentially what he's doing. When he says one word, he actually means something else. And of course, we've seen this, I don't know how many times on the far right. This is the far right tactic, you know. What was it? All the you know, with Pepe and the phrase clown world was one at one point. I don't think it is anymore, but like I say, it moves on continuously because they know that people catch on, so they've got to constantly change the words of what they're using. So when Poole said so to track Johnson, a black then employee of his defunct media company back in 2019, he also chose him to, quote, choose a side because his ex-boss couldn't ascertain which side you're going to be on, is how Johnson recalled Poole phrasing it. And two individuals familiar with the event will back up Johnson's account. Oh my words, that's insane. Imagine you've got, you know, again, a black friend, and you go up to them, dude, there's going to be a race war. What side are you going to be on? That's crazy. Oh my word. You know, I thought Tim Poole had lost it, but I didn't know how bad he had lost it. This is like finding out when you find out about stuff about Alex Jones, about what he's done in like private and what people say about what Jones is like in private, that he's not only just like his personality like he is on stream, he's like that 100% of the time, if not worse. And it's like, so, but yeah, wow. Wow. That's all I'm going to say. When reached for a comment, Poole fervently denied telling Johnson about a race war. He called any suggestion he had insane, citing his context of a mixed-race heritage. Poole further disputed many of the claims and many of the descriptions of the events in this article, and allegedly they were provided by individuals who harbored a personal vendetta against him. His response can be read here. So, but yeah, we've heard this before. Yes, that's true what Voltaire said. To get people to commit atrocities, first you have to get them to leave absurdities. Very true. Very, very true. But yeah, doesn't surprise me. Does not surprise me at all. So, anyway, we'll continue with this. So, Poole's journey from beanie-clad Occupy Wall Street live streamer to reactionary social media performer, per the Southern Poverty Law Center, may seem very improbable at face value, but some who've known him aren't exactly surprised. It's a trajectory I've seen before, almost always with a young and youngish men who are so laser-focused on making their own careers that they'll arrive at racism and misogyny almost by accident, because that's what gets the most clicks. said Laurie Penny, a reporter and writer who has covered the far-right provocateurs and knew Poole when he worked for Vice. This, of course, does not make them any less dangerous, because they're not encumbered by an ideology. If anything, it makes them more so. And I agree with that. Because like I say, Tim Poole, depending on whatever day he feels like, can be one side. He can be portraying, the center leftist, while at the same time having, a calm chat with, someone about white nationalism and why the United States is about to fall into civil war. But then he can claim, oh, it's okay, I'm just a center lefty, I just hate the extremes of the left. It's truly an incredible grift Tim Poole has, to be honest. Do you think it was Lex Luthor? Yeah, I think it was Lex Luthor who said that. To be honest, Poole's not far away. And to be honest, I know why Tim Poole wears a beanie. Look, I know I've got disappearing hair. I know I've got disappearing hair. I know my hair is not long for this world. But you know what? I'll enjoy it while it lasts, and I'll live up to it. One day I will be on stream and I'll have bald is truly beautiful, Tim. You've got to embrace it. Stop wearing your beanie and just embrace the baldness. Join with me, my balding brother. The hair on top is going thin, but it's the sides where it still counts. I mean, I don't know if I can. It's not long enough to do, but one day in my old age, I'll end up looking like Doc Brown, like my hair out like here, and I'll be bald on top. So, Timothy Daniel Poole was born in 1986 in Chicago. Very scant biographical information actually exists beyond what Poole's made public. But during his childhood, his father, a now retired firefighter, and a mother who sold cars divorced. The family then fell into financial distress, he said. He attended a private Catholic school through the 5th grade before transferring to public school and dropping out by age 14. The year he received all Fs. In a progress report, my comprehension level was much higher than that of many teachers. Poole says, and school made him miserable. Jobs in retail and as a baggage hauler at the American Eagle Airlines while a teenager ensued. The Transport Workers Union has confirmed that Poole was actually a member. Videos from this time show Poole was dabbling in tech and skateboarding. The latter did not abate. Poole erected two custom-built skate ramps at nearly 1 million and at nearly 1 million 8-bedroom Maryland compound he bought in September of 2020. In his early 20s, Poole did some street canvassing for non-profits, soliciting donations and signatures. That much is certain. Poole, however, has described the bulk of those jobs in ways that strain credulity. Sometimes Poole has held the position of fundraising events and marketing director for one non-profit, he claimed, and, quote, a manager at many of the biggest fundraising companies and non-profits in the world. Other titles include fundraising director at a homeless shelter, non-profit director, director at several activist organizations, and even a fundraising director for many non-profits. Poole rarely actually names the organizations. And in one video, he says it's to avoid possible litigation. But that doesn't explain why no jobs are listed on his LinkedIn page prior to 2013. On occasion, Poole has let slip a few names, though. On air and in private, Poole has claimed that he worked for the Great Lakes Coalition, the Human Rights Campaign, Greenpeace, and Children's International. Representatives from these organizations said that they had no record of Poole directly working for them, though Greenpeace records only date back to 2008. In a direct message to a Twitter follower, Poole said he'd been a supervisor with the Public Interest Research Group. So why on earth, like, I'm very interested, why on earth is Poole masquerading at working with all these charities? Like, I'm blown away. Why on earth would you masquerade saying you'd worked at all these charities when you clearly haven't? And in some very, very high up positions that he's claiming in. I have no idea why on earth he would be doing that, unless there is, again, a reason behind this. And I suspect we may find out what that reason is. So though the group denied employing him directly as spokesperson for the Fund for Public Interest, a canvassing organization affiliated with the group confirmed that Poole worked as a canvasser or field manager in California for a few weeks between April and May of 2010. Poole has mentioned working for an unnamed subcontractor with several non-profits. That said, he definitely didn't run any fundraising, the spokesperson said. So turning street canvassing, or essentially a low-grade supervisory role, into a very lofty title of fundraising director could be dismissed as pure resume pumping. But Poole cites his past work and experiences when inciting against charities, or even labeling all non-profits as corrupt, as if he were privy to their inner workings. Most of the non-profits I've worked for I think they're all scams, said Poole. A racket designed to wring cash from donors. They're just really paying themselves. So that's why, then, essentially. He's trying to do this. He's using these positions, these pumping himself up to a bigger level than he really was, to essentially try and take on the level of something greater, and essentially legitimately go after charities, which I think is quite a bad move there, Tim. That's a very, very bad move. Very, very bad move. Actually, in fact, hold on a second, because I've forgotten to do this. There we go. There we go. There, hold on. I was just doing some personal promotion there. I'm just putting it out on Twitter because I'd forgotten to do that before I started. There we go. There we go. Right. Anyway, back to where we were. So, bit of self-promotion. Right. Where were we? Yeah, so I think it's very, very very, very scummy move to do that. And take it for someone who's worked actually in the third sector. I've worked for my local mind for a couple of years back, years ago now. But I would never like pump up myself to something like that. I mean, yeah, it's shocking that he would go after charities in that way, and he's never actually worked in any of the charity sectors. But again, like I said earlier, I knew there'd be a reason for it. So, where were we? So here we are. In comments to the Daily Beast, Poole maintained he did work for the Children's International and Greenpeace, though he did not say what his title was, nor neither the organization's record actually confirmed his employment. Poole further claimed that he was a director and manager for 2 other non-profits. He can't name the citing. He can't either name them or cite them, citing settlement agreements. Okay, that's a bit suspicious there. So, by September of 2011, Poole was living with his brother Chris in Newport News, Virginia. After seeing images of police violence in September from the Occupy Wall Street protest in Security Park, he hopped on a bus. In New York, Poole hooked up with Henry Ferry, a then out-of-work realtor and sales manager. The pair began documenting the unfolding political movement on a then relatively new live streaming service, Ustream. Before long, Poole had assumed an on-camera role, and the live videos took off. And they directly decided to form a media company called The Other 99. The bare-bones DIY operation, Poole filmed using only his cell phone and was often able to get greater access and immediacy than even some legacy media shops, adding to their bona fides on this. The Other 99 weren't perceived as neutral observers, but rather actively involved with the movement. Eventually, network and cable news programs began rebroadcasting their live stream footage, and live streams lasting for hours became a trademark, to including a very notable 21-hour stretch where cops cleared out the park. Within a month, they'd racked up more than 2 million unique views. Poole claimed a substantial social media following and a near universal positive coverage from a wide array of both online and print publications. Awards and accolades followed, hurled hard on from Poole, and Poole was dubbed the eyes of the movement by Time magazine. However, some activists weren't buying the hype. What a surprise. What a surprise. Doesn't surprise me at all that he was involved in this, because we've already seen that everyone who seems to have worked with Tim Poole seems to take a very, to use the already used joke, dim look on Mr. Poole. So Timothy Fitzgerald and Tess Cohen were both members of the General Assembly of the GA, the organizing hub for Occupy. All appearances to the contrary, Poole was never aligned with the movement, they said. That is 100% Poole's mythology. According to Cohen, Fitzgerald described Poole's participation as a branding exercise, a leveraging of Occupy's very brief notoriety to try and elevate his own profile. Unlike live streamers who were working with the GA, Poole was soliciting donations to the Other 99. This enraged a certain amount. Garnered a certain amount of suspicion, if not resentment. The Other 99 disbanded in 2012, with Poole and Ferry both firing off accusations of mismanaged funds and misplaced priorities. The Daily Beast was not able to reach Ferry for comment. Many GA-affiliated live streamers, like Cohen, also felt a duty to not only detail the day-to-day activities of Occupy, but to advance the cause. Poole differed. He tended to gravitate towards the action and conflict, Cohen said. whether it was the police crackdown or the protests engaging in civil disobedience and at times illegal activity. To her, Poole had crossed a line. I'm not about to endanger other people by creating evidence that could be used against them, and he's happy to do that, she said. Poole has boasted that the police watched his Occupy live streams. Poole parachuted into Occupy without an even understanding of its ideological underpinnings, Cohen explained. Over time, protesters grew increasingly wary of Poole's presence, and it was made clear he wasn't welcome during one of his broadcasts where his phone was knocked out of his hand. Poole would maintain that both protesters and the interviews that his adherence to objectivity and transparency meant sharing almost everything he'd recorded. Few would quibble with this explanation for a reporter or a citizen journalist, but Poole openly presented himself as a pro-Occupy activist. I do not consider myself a journalist. I consider myself 100% activist, he told On the Media in November of 2011, who was there to support the movement. Once Occupy was out of the news cycle, Poole flipped. Not surprising. Not surprising at all. This is Tim Poole's grift. He was on the left, now he's on the right. Well, sorry, center left. He just happens to, shall we say, take more views from these far right personalities. I'm not an activist, he told El Paris 10 months later. What a flip, 10 months later. He was, however, now calling himself a journalist. By 2018, Poole had gone further, saying, I don't align with Occupy Wall Street and never did. He said his definition of objectivity doesn't hold up for Cohen either. By singularly focusing on the cop confrontation and the acts of dubious legality, he had as much a biased lens as we did. He said in a follow-up email, viral ready videos of the sort have become something of a growing industry on the right. He said that there was a document compiled by the political movement, and he was there to get views and conflicts of what got views. These days, however, Poole paints a lot harsher picture of Occupy. It was crooked, he claimed. What is more, his opinions were rejected out of hand because others assumed he was white. When he identified as having a mixed race background, Poole's maternal grandmother is Korean, occupiers welcomed his contributions. The people were racist. They were the most racist people I've ever encountered in my life, Poole claimed in February. More so than the avowed racists and members of the alt-right he'd spoken to. The Daily Beast was unable to identify any interviews with Poole either during or immediately after Occupy in which he mentioned the rampant racism. What a surprise. Of course, it's all about doing this. It's all about painting your opponents in as bad as light possible. So, of course, Poole has to paint the thing that got him notoriety as something that's bad, something that's bad, and, something that he doesn't associate with anymore. Because, he's left that behind. He disagrees with the extreme left. Asked about Poole's story, Fitzgerald replied, "This sounds like a total fabricated nonsense, overheard at a local coffee shop. The type anecdote meant to launder the false notion that racial justice is a zero sum. As someone who's documented hundreds of meetings, Fitzgerald said that the idea that Poole was discouraged from participating is easily disprovable. Poole never participated in public conversations, let alone tried to speak up." In reality, white-identified folks like myself were more than welcomed and were more than heard at Occupy Wall Street, and Occupy's efforts to lift up voices of people who had been marginalized did not come at anyone's expense, he continued. So that definitely would not have happened. So for the next year and a half, Poole struck out on his own. Poole made appearances at South by Southwest and journalism panels, and he continued reporting from the field, and offers to crank out a ghost-written book or work for an unnamed TV news program were turned down, Poole claimed. A, quote, hackerspace in upstate New York he was helping to launch never appears to have actually materialized, and funds was solicited for a documentary at the time of the ongoing Occupy-related protests, which were apparently then went unfinished. What a surprise. What a grift. Again, not surprising. It's literally the grifter's playbook, one after the other. One after the other. The novelty of live stream broadcast was very much held in high regard, the harbinger of a new democratized, decentralized kind of reporting, and Poole was viewed as its avatar. Vice hired him in the spring of 2013, when the site was thriving. A partnership with HBO had been announced, and within months, Rupert Murdoch would buy a 5% stake, valuing it at $1.4 billion. And by 2017, additional cash infusion led to a $5.7 billion valuation, and over time, questions about Vice's long-term financial stability. Poole's appeal to the outlet was as a one-man content creator, able to jet from location to location at a moment's notice and attract the gobs of viewers. And it didn't take long before the staff had soured on their new hire. Nor is a surprise. Some former colleagues pointed to Poole's evident lack of reporting experience or even skills, save for his ability to hit play on live stream. He was bringing nothing notable to the table, a former Vice producer said. It felt like we'd been conned. Poole's first trip from Vice was to Istanbul, Turkey, and he saw his colleagues' worries borne out. An ex-Vice staffer familiar with the shoot described their issues with much of the footage that Poole had sent back, with him sitting in his hotel room talking to the camera, and once the conflict had subsided, emerging to point and gawk at the rubble. An initial version of the short documentary didn't even pass muster with their Vice superiors. They claimed it only because it had failed, because they to make it seems as if Poole was on the front lines of the unrest. It had to be drastically re-edited prior to being released. At a different shoot in Thailand, Vice sent two teams of reporters. One positioned itself in the thick of the protesters, and Poole rode on a moped on the outskirts of town, shouting into the camera, and he was removed from the conflict. It was just hilarious, a person who worked for Poole at the time said. A February 2014 shoot in Venezuela ended abruptly. According to Poole, he was forced to flee the country after a high-profile pro-Maduro media figure came accusing him of being a spy. Should he ever return, he will be killed, Poole has claimed. Again, given what we're hearing so far, I doubt that very much. His trepidations were certainly understandable. Providing coverage during civil unrest and from conflict zones can spook even seasoned hands, let alone someone who isn't familiar with the lay of the land, and a former senior Vice editorial employee explained. But Poole had trouble even fessing up to his fears. Multiple Vice sources said. Instead, he'd toss out thinly veiled excuses, pinning his reluctance to leave the hotel on problems with his technical gear or producers not comprehending the severity of the situation. Poole strongly disagrees with the criticisms of his field reporting. I covered in the Getsy Park to a smashing success, he told the Daily Beast. Back at Vice's Brooklyn offices, Poole found other ways to alienate his colleagues. Oh dear. You can already see what's coming now. One female ex-Vice staffer recalled in a 2013 conversation with Poole, in which he told her point blank, "Women are too emotional to be good journalists. Their feelings get in the way." What a bold take there by Tim Poole. Yep. I knew that was going to be bad as soon as it was like ex-female employee. I wonder what's going to come next. Yeah. None of this is all, to be honest, it's shocking, but it's not shocking at all. Yeah. Tim Poole is not a CIA agent. If Tim Poole was a CIA agent, he would be the worst CIA agent, because Tim Poole is the type of person who would go around telling people that he was a CIA agent. That is the type of person that Tim Poole would be. So, anyway, it continues. An individual who was present for the exchange confirmed her account, so that's been proven then. Another confirmed they'd been told by a female staffer at the time. Poole told the Daily Beast that it was absurd to think he'd made this comment. Somewhat relatedly, 2 years ago, Poole announced he wanted a wife who would stay at home and raise his children, as opposed to having her own career. Tim Poole wanted to live that tradcon lifestyle. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. So it bothered Tim that this desire was now being viewed as socially unacceptable. Poole commented, Poole complained last year that, quote, feminism had negatively impacted his ability to find a romantic partner and start a family. You know what the problem is, though? It's definitely not me, he said. I think it's everybody else. Yeah, it's you, Tim. It's definitely you, Tim. Yeah. Oh, my word. Oh my word. Oh, I've heard about this one. So when Poole was given an early version of Google Glass, he strolled around the office broadcasting his co-workers' activities live. It was viewed by some at Vice as a transparent attempt to bolster the image he'd been cultivating. A reporter who availed himself of the latest in bleeding-edge tech to expand the boundaries of reporting. Of course, there was nothing worth filming in an early 2010s media shop, save for people just sitting at their desks, writing stories and whatnot. Baffled staffers either did their best to ignore him or were forced to politely ask that he stop recording without their consent. Oh, do people remember Google Glass as well? I remember back in the day thinking that Google Glass was going to be like the next big thing, and thinking that that's what we were going to wear. But no, like I say, I called that wrong, and I'll own up to that. I definitely got that call wrong. Yeah. boot to the groin, or more accurately, a boot to the beanie. Where are we? So, Vice also provided reporters working conflict zones with protective gear. Poole would wear a flak jacket in the office. Why on earth would you wear a flak jacket in the office? Per multiple Vice sources, several Vice employees thought it laughable or made him look like a poser, but others found his behavior downright offensive. One former longtime Vice editorial staffer said, since Vice reporters had been detained by hostile foreign governments in their eyes, Poole treated the gear like a cosplay outfit. Touting his own bravery and accomplishments and a Vice paycheck, or the famous people he knew, it didn't go over well either. At one point, he brought hacker turned Nazi troll Andrew Weaver Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, I think that's how you say it. Wow. Yeah. Remember, guys, Tim Poole is like a totally center lefty and has never had anything to do with neo-Nazi beliefs. Tim Poole, the centrist, everybody, friends with known neo-Nazi hacker. Oh, yeah. The things you do during LARPs. Yeah, of course. I mean, we've all been there, right? We've all been pretending to, like being political posers and, hanging around with, right-wing extremists. Sure, we've all done that LARP. Said no one ever apart from Tim Poole. Oh. Yeah. Dude, I think you'll find the only acceptable place to wear plate armor is in medieval, fully armed, mixed martial art combat settings. That is the only place it should be worn. And I will die on that hill. So anyway, let's continue with this because, oh man, these are just insane. This is crazy. This is just crazy. I can't believe some of this stuff. But good on this guy for digging up all this. This is a fantastic piece of reporting this. So good on this guy for doing this. So he brought the hacker turned neo-Nazi troll into the Vice newsroom and paraded him around. The longtime former editor of staff felt that Poole was showing him off, as to say, check it out, I'm hanging out with Weave. I'm so plugged into internet culture. In the documentary Hacker Wars, Poole appears in scenes with him. For another glimpse at how some at Vice viewed Poole, he was on the while he was on staff, a co-worker drew a very satirical cartoon strip depicting him as a penis wearing a beanie. Oh my god. That guy has to release that photo. Like there is no way he cannot release that after this. He has to release it. Oh, I can't. Oh my word! Imagine being that hated in your office. that people draw pictures like that of you. You just imagine that for a second. I cannot conceive that. There was a deficit of ideas from Tim Pool, a former member of Vice's video team said. There was a frustration about his inability to do a repeat hit, like his coverage of Occupy Wall Street. He still had his fans in upper management, and the ability to remain on their good graces also pissed people off. Specifically, how seemingly oblivious the upper management and the execs at Vice were to the fact that Tim Pool was a total hack, as a former longtime editor of staff put it. Wow. Heard it right there. You've heard it right there from the horse's mouth, from a long-time Vice editor, calls him a complete and total utter hack. Am I shocked? Not one bit. Not one bit. Poole obviously has a different recollection of his stint at Vice. In his comments to the Daily Beast, Poole firmly insisted that any allegations that he'd failed to perform under duress or shied away from hazardous reporting were false. I constantly flew into chaos, he said. As to the broader criticisms, I don't care if people say stupid things about me. People are allowed to hate me, and there are many people I'm still friends with from Vice. Publicly, Poole has repeatedly stated that he was both the first and founding member of Vice News. Were it not for him, Vice News might not have even existed even. I'm convinced Vice News to do real news, on the ground reporting, he declared in October. The outlet has been sending reporters to cover stories from far-flung locations dating back to the mid-2000s. Danny Gold, one of the first Vice News hires, said while Poole had been brought on board to the vertically fairly early on, he wasn't a founding member. That's not true. Multiple Vice sources agreed with Gold, who was occasionally freelanced for the Daily Beast. And the idea that he convinced Vice to do real on-the-ground reporting is also not true, he added. What a surprise. He pumped himself up that he was working for charities in bigger positions he was. He's now also claiming to be a founder of Vice News. I'm not surprised by that revelation. It doesn't surprise me, but yeah, it fits with his MO that this article is pointing out and painting of him. So Poole has insisted that his colleagues were lazy and overpaid, citing conversations he's had with a couple of former Vice employees. Poole also said going woke had led to its downturn, and financial and otherwise. Unnamed investors capitulated to feminists, following up on high-profile sexual harassment allegations against Vice in 2017 was also to blame. Imagine what Vice would be today under my leadership, he mused. Probably wouldn't be called Vice News. It would probably be called Tim Poole News, because that's how much of a narcissist this guy is. His most recent attempt at creating an independent news site imploded back in January. Oh, this is about the cat stuff. You haven't heard this. This is wild, this. Despite his crowdfunding of over 1.2 million in 2019, in the aftermath, 2 employees alleged that Tim Poole had kidnapped a cat. The former lead reporter had filed a complaint in California charging Poole's company, Subverse Inc., with engaging in retaliatory termination per documents obtained by the Daily Beast. Poole has filed a 1.2 million lawsuit in the state of Connecticut, accusing the 2 former employees of unjust enrichment. Oh, not surprising there. Again, always going to get on the grift there, Tim. The end of Poole's year-long tenure at Vice came in the summer of 2014. Mass protests broke out in Ferguson, Missouri, following the shooting of Michael Brown and Vice sent to crews, including Poole, and reporters from their recently launched HBO show. But Poole struggled because he, quote, wasn't really a journalist. A staffer who was part of Vice's coverage said, asking questions and interviewing protesters and residents didn't seem to pique his curiosity. Despite the stories they told about the disturbing interactions with the police, Poole tended to keep his head buried in his phone. It was so bizarre, said the staffer. It was always about him. Not a surprise. Like I say, not a surprise. Not a surprise at all. So, given the heightened tensions in the area and the expanding national conversation about race, many locals were apprehensive when approached by reporters. If you don't strike the right tone, you could easily be dismissed. And that's what was happening over and over again with Poole. A second staffer who presented in Ferguson said, from the perspective of Poole, he was unable to overcome this obstacle. He was focused on promoting himself. He also seemed as if any person of color and Poole interacted with just really had no time for him, they said. The second staffer also remarked that Poole spent an inaudible amount of time while on the ground checking his Twitter feed and, for reasons he couldn't ascertain, touching base with Casey Newsett, a very popular YouTuber who was in town to provide his own coverage. Reached by phone, Newsett confirmed their account. During Ferguson, he said, Tim was very intrigued how I was able to build this brand for myself, how I was able to build my own following on YouTube, he said. At first blush, he said, the second staffer dismissed Poole as being clueless, but over the course of the shoot, their perceptions shattered. He acted like a narcissist, someone who didn't care about other people. What a surprise. That night in August, other Vice News reporters and producers managed to get behind the barricades and law enforcement that law enforcement had established. Poole, who arrived late, had been shunted into the parking lot of a Target away from the West Florence Avenue, where the main clashes between police and protesters took place. The live stream video from that night shows the differences in the two feeds. Poole was shunted into the lower right-hand corner. The other Vice News crew took up the rest of the screen. In the comments section, as the evening unfolded, viewers treated the two feeds as if it was a kind of competition, and Poole was losing. Unsurprisingly, since they both provided real-time reporting, and Poole was merely talking or even just speculating about things he saw from a distance. 3 years after the Ferguson protests, Poole tried to rewrite history, alleging to the New Yorker that, quote, a Vice camerawoman, not him, wanted to remain on safe terrain and instead preferred to interview the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Meanwhile, he took to the streets to cover what was happening, where he said grenades were going off. Guess which one got more views? So none of that is accurate per multiple Vice sources. The, quote, camerawoman he referred to was his producer, who had gotten past the barricades and set up by the cops to cover what was happening in the streets, not Poole. In a brief interview with Jackson, took place early the following morning after an all-nighter spent shooting and editing, not while the protests were taking place. It never aired on Vice. And there was another crew's videos, not Poole's, which drove viewership. So, again, Tim Poole there taking credit for all that. Oh, thank you very much, Carthel. Carthel OG. Thank you very much for the super chat there. Thank you very much. Thank you for the support there. And by the way, if you would like to support the channel, there are links down below to my Patreon page and buy me coffee. But we'll get on with this. Because this is just juicy. I can't believe these revelations, but these are so juicy. So following publication in December of 2017, the quotes from Poole about Ferguson were removed from the New Yorker's story, titled "The Live Streamers Who Were Challenging Traditional Journalism." So even the New Yorker removed his comments. That says a lot. The magazine wrote that the changes were made because Pool's statements contained several errors. In his emailed response to the Daily Beast, Pool claimed the exercised quotes were not reflective of his comments and expressed similar sentiments recently on YouTube, calling it a fake story. But in August of 2018, Pool said, while he disagreed with the framing, the reporter who'd written the article, quote, does a good job and had been fair. Again, it's you get the idea of where Tim Pool's coming from. He's friends with someone 1 minute, but the second it's more favorable to throw them under the bus the next minute, he's more than willing to do that. What a surprise. What a surprise indeed. So, shortly after that night of filming, Pool got on a plane while Vice continued to cover the events on the ground in Ferguson without him. It did not take long before Pool had left Vice altogether and moved on to yet another media gig. Fusion had been on a hiring spree in 2014. Flushed with Disney and Univision cash, the site had poached well-known reporters, editors, and columnists. They had also access to the pricey TV studio in Florida and a 100-person digital team, and that was soon assembled. That same year, Fusion reportedly suffered a $35 million in losses. Daniel Emberg, the then chief digital editor officer of Fusion, told the Daily Beast that the protest and unrest had led Fusion to believe that Pool would make an ideal addition. They believed that they had purchased Pool aggressively while he was still at Vice and signed him to a 2-year contract, which Alberg had said was in the low 6 figures per year. After coming on board in September, Pool was dubbed Fusion's Director of Media Innovation. Oh dear. Can you guess what happened during his time here? Can you guess what's going to happen? Can you guess? I can. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be good at all. So, soon enough, staffers and executives at Fusion began spotting many of the same issues that Pool had that had cropped up at Vice. In late 2014, Fusion sent Pool back to Ferguson. Like Vice staffers before them, a former Fusion employee and familiar with the shoot said that interviewing people didn't even seem to pique Pool's interest, that much particularly black people. He would check his phone regularly, obsessed with the social media metrics. Pool took it as a given that his colleagues would do the work for him. Very much a prima donna is how the Fusion employees described him. June Lavin, an assistant producer at Fusion who worked with Pool, had a similar experience. Pool was always and came across as this know-it-all who never wanted to hear anybody else's input, he said. In-office problems like those at Vice also persisted too. The editorial staff took issue with his reporting, said Elmierberg, an ex-chief digital officer. People took issue with his treatment of people. Multiple Fusion sources mention an incident in which Pool berated a female subordinate in public to the point where she was visibly upset. And Tim Pool wonders why he's not married. Yeah. Wow. Wow. We didn't like him, and the feeling appeared to be mutual. Felix Simone, one of the new splashy Fusion hires, told the Daily Beast in October 2020 video. Pool suggested he, quote, didn't get along with Fusion employees either. The outlet was also not functioning at peak capacity either, according to an investigative article by Gizmodo, the media group. A culture of complacency and excess festered at Univision and Fusion's parent company. Univision was also owned by GMG, and when the story was published, Fusion in particular was pitching one content strategy to another. and chasing Facebook traffic, and virtually at the expense of more substantial reporting. One staffer told GMG the outlet decided we're going to be super woke millennial focused media outlet. God, I remember those heavy days where that was thought to be the next big thing. Poole had similar complaints. After being lured to Fusion with promises of a full editorial independence, he claims to have been directed to reinforce leftist puppets and lie to the audience. To tell the audience what they want to hear is how Poole puts it. 4 years ago, Poole initiated a Reddit AMA that Aylmerberg had given him and other Fusion staff members marching order to side with the audience. The ex-Fusion boss does not even recall saying so, nor does Poole's description match the company policy. To suggest we bent, ignored, or even fabricated facts is simply not true, Aylmerberg said in a text message. Fortunately, both Fusion's reporting and Tim Poole's YouTube channel are public, so anyone can come to their own conclusions about who was peddling the baseless narratives to fit their audience's point of view. You know that's true. So, like some other of the high-profile names on staff, Poole wasn't producing a ton of content for their site. A former Fusion staffer who worked with Poole said, there were many weeks where he just didn't do anything. Poole described his stint at Fusion as having been slapped with golden handcuffs. Well compensated, but his ambitions were thwarted, so I sat around, he said. It was boring, and I eventually left. Poole's contract ended with Fusion in September of 2016. And invariably, its tale, as he recounts consistently and with purpose, like an origin story, he ditched Fusion and digital media as a whole because they're utterly corrupt and feckless, not because of his own failings. It's definitely his own failings. Put it this way, if someone came to that to me with that sort of resume and background, I wouldn't be hiring this guy. Oh, thank you very much, Hajit. Yes, Hajit 101. Hajit 01. Thank you very much for that. No problem. I like to say, I always try and bring the important stuff. So now only unshackled from his corporate masters could he now tell the real truth, the whole truth, the things they really didn't want you to know. And no one would be in a position to tell him otherwise or stop him getting a story floridly wrong. Since being liberated from his working with editors and producers, Poole's ambitions with the seediest elements of the far right have only grown, and the falsehoods have accelerated rapidly. Scroll through his Poole content and output. It's hard to find a video he's produced which does not contain some combination of rank distortions, conspiracy theories treated as if they were credible ideas, or a basic misunderstanding of the subject at hand. A recent study named Poole as a super spreader of falsehoods about voter fraud in the run-up to the 2020 election. Poole's response after a handful of stories came out about the adverse responses to the vaccine in December. And maybe Poole basically speculated that the left and the media wanted to reduce the public's confidence in the vaccine. That way they could deny Trump the rightly deserved credit for his miraculous feat and lower his popularity at a crucial moment while Trump was fighting for the presidency, he said. By July, he'd pivoted to fear-mongering about the Biden administration and his efforts to reach the unvaccinated. What a surprise. What an absolute surprise. Like I say, he's a complete grifter. I honestly, I don't see how, if you were a Tim Poole fan reading this, with the amount of work that's gone into this article, I do not see how he could be a fan. Will Tim Pool survive this? Yes, of course he will. Like I say, he's big enough to be able to survive this. No, I don't think this is going to be a big enough scandal to take him out. But this is almost certainly a bombshell. Something that is going to hit Tim Pool hard. How hard, I don't know, but it will hit him hard in some way. And of course, there was also Pool's record of political predictions. Oh, this is fantastic. This is what Tim Pool's most known for, of predicting a complete landslide for Trump, like a 49 or 50 state landslide. Yeah. So in 2020, he routinely forecast a Trump win, possibly by a 49 or 50 state landslide per Pool. When Biden won, Pool tried to retcon this history, claiming when he said landslide, it was tied to, quote, hypothetical contingencies, like Trump appointing Tulsi Gabbard or legalizing marijuana. This is false. As Pool repeatedly admits, I turn on the camera and I rant, whether he's deeply familiar with the subject or not. And for viewers who treat him as a valued source for news and a way to understand how the world really works, there is no script, there is no plan. Striking out at this turf inevitably leads him to some unattainable positions. When confronted with concrete evidence of mistake, Pool doubles down. Sometimes this results in him siding with despots. Or, as was the case in 2017, he led credency to conspiracy theories like that Seth Rich had been the source for documents published by WikiLeaks. 2 years later, he denied having done so, while threatening legal action against outlets, including the Daily Beast, which have accurately covered his comments. Pool even mentioned in March that he'd begun strategically posting contradictory information about his opinions and beliefs on Twitter. That way, none of his social media posts could be included in any articles about him. Yeah, that's certainly one strategy. I wouldn't call it smart in one way. I wouldn't call it smart. Of course, no group attracts Pool's enmity more than the mainstream media. Most reporters are, quote, morons, he has said, who publish garbage, nonsensical drama and rage bait trash. As Pool has dumped into his audience over and over again, the profession is rife with lazy, incompetent, and evil vampires who perpetually lie. Unlike him, they hate you, he often sneers. That is the exact same tactic Alex Jones uses when he talks about media. Why you shouldn't trust mainstream media. You should trust me. I'm the only one you can trust. Oh, Gorilla. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for the support there. But yeah, it's typical strategy. Trust me, not them. They're the ones who are lying to you. Again, typical tactic of mainstream conspiracy theorists. Alex Jones, prime example. David Icke, another example. You remember when we covered those anti-vax protests? Exactly the same strategy. Don't trust your doctors, trust us. Exactly the same strategy. So mining the far-right outrage cycle for stories, serving as a sanitized conduit to the far right for an audience desperate to have their misconceptions validated and grievances nursed, has proven an extremely profitable business model. From summer to early autumn of 2020, Pool's 3 YouTube channels have racked up over 100 million views per month. And according to Social Blade, Pool claims that he topped out at around 120 million during the election season. And as a member of YouTube's partner program, Pool was handsomely rewarded. In August of 2020 alone, Pool raked in over 600. My God, that is an eye-watering amount of cash. as he boasted during the recorded September conversation. By Poole's calculations, YouTube accounted for 90%. In this email to the Daily Beast, Poole claimed his income was totally, wildly incorrect and easily disproved, but also declined to provide the correct figure. Perhaps the audio has been edited, he said, without evidence. So he's even trying to deny, for, I don't know, somewhat unknown reason, that he got paid that amount. That's insane. Why on earth? Again, this is a really good grifter strategy, because he can say, hey, I don't get paid that much from YouTube. It's you guys that support me. And of course, then he can get people to give him more money. Like I say, Tim Poole is a straight up grifter. If anything, this article is like proof that shows it. Look at all these things that people are saying about him in it. It's how it happens. So 2 industry experts told the Daily Beast that Poole may be exaggerating somewhat. Social Blade's public estimates has a potential earnings are lower too, but banking about 550,000 is well within the realm of possibility, they said, as if Poole claims 90% of his videos are monetized. Anecdotally, this rate squares frequently of ads seen by the Daily Beast in its estimation of Poole's content. These days, since he has more than halved that number of videos produced per week, he's down to 45 million or so, where it was in April 2020. Still, though, his Facebook viewership pales in comparison. Poole has prospered on YouTube for over a year and is easily surpassed far better known right-wing yankers like Dennis Prager, Dan Bongino, Ben Shapiro on this platform. Steven Crowder did leapfrog Poole this April, however, and in the same month in which he was demonetized for violating community guidelines. The following month, Crowder was suspended for 2 weeks. It is unclear how much revenue the podcast version of his video actually brings in. Poole said in December that the viewership numbers were dramatically lower than on YouTube, despite the show reaching 6th place on Apple's charts as of January. He doesn't do many live ad reads on his channel, but one sponsor sells the survivalist bulk food buckets. Have you seen these buckets? These are absolutely foul. There's a video somewhere on YouTube of a YouTuber who actually gets like one of those buckets, and they look absolutely foul. And honestly, you can see their reaction to it. It's unbelievable, but yeah. So Poole hawked them while in Texas was suffering from massive power outlets. During the Timcast IRL live broadcast, which air 5 times a week and began last summer, fans can pay for a YouTube super chat, putting their question to Poole at the top of the queue. On any given live stream, the take often tops 4 figures. Production expenses are minimal, he has said. So how did Poole reach these levels of prominence and profit? Becca Lewis, the PhD candidate for Stafford University 3 years ago, said she conducted a study examining how the YouTube algorithm was funneling viewers to the far right. Poole was a central subject of her work. Like many social media influencers, political YouTubes packages themselves as authentic and relatable, and therefore more trustworthy. That mainstream news sources, Lewis told the Daily Beast, and while a great deal of emphasis had been placed on the effect of YouTube as an audience, the converse is also true. They continually A/B test ideas and receive different feedback about what works. Poole is no exception. In the recorded summer conversation, Poole told his ex-colleagues that since he'd announced he'd be voting for Trump, my views are skyrocketing. Publicly, Poole makes it clear he's very well aware of which stories his audience wants to hear. Over the long enough time, that question of whether or not they are true believers evangelizing for their far right or motivated by profits or attention becomes unanswerable and not even really relevant. One of the most visible form of evidence we can find of radicalization on the platform is watching the influencers themselves get radicalized over time, Lewis said. It's a different direction that Poole's content has headed. After leaving Ferguson, Poole went back to covering demonstrators and political events like the Deplorable Ball in DC, a shindig hosted by the extremely online MAGA luminaries. And of course, the week of Trump's inauguration. This meant far greater contact with the fringes of the ideological spectrum. Poole scored a few appearances on Fox News where he talked about being threatened by Antifa, and a trip to Milwaukee of 2016 was, quote, cut short, with Poole stating that he had unrest had made in the area had made it unsafe for him and the others who presented as white. On YouTube, Poole has hosted or guest even far-right personalities like Brittany Pettibone, Lauren Southern, Carl Sagan of Akkad Benjamin, Mike Cernovich, Mark Count Dankula Meechan, Gavin McGinnis, Anthony Baked Alaska, Anthony Baked Alaska Giannetti, and more. Those extremists were given a space to air their views without much of a way of resistance from Poole. With Giannetti, who asked and gained notoriety for tweeting the 1488 and other anti-Semitic memes, Poole asked, "Are you racist?" Giannetti said no. Poole called these posts jokes and seemed satisfied with his response. Within months, Giannetti attended the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, where he used a similar line of questioning to interrogate Cernovich. At that time, the Pizzagate promoter was trying to distance himself from the openly bigoted factions in the alt-right, like the white nationalist Richard Spencer. Cernovich said no, and Poole didn't even press him. Lewis told the Daily Beast that the mutual beneficial collaborations between the conservative and far-right circles were commonplace in 2016 and 17, when YouTube was taking more offhand's approach to moderating extremist content. Far-right creators viewed the soon-to-called the intellectual dark web and others like Poole as a useful bridge to a new and possible lucrative audience, and a batch of fresh recruits for their interlocutors. Engaged with personalities considered to be on the fringe and added a panacea of salacious, even bringing them to attention as well. To this day, the far-right mines value from intermingling with ostensible centrists. Again, it's what happens. It's what happens. It's all this stuff, but this is insane. But then that's what happens. That's exactly what happens. This is the madness of this this article. Like I say, I can't believe it, but yeah, it's like I say, good on this guy for doing this. But we've known this for a while. I've talked about this a couple of times on my channel, even that these far right people will parade themselves as being centrists or try and ally themselves with people who are centrists so they don't look as bad, so they can get in with the normies. So, at the same time, Poole and others of his ilk strove to maintain plausible deniability. They weren't espousing far-right beliefs themselves, mind you. They were just reporting. Poole is still running the same playbook. He has ridiculed and condemned QAnon, but hasn't stopped him inviting QAnon-associated figures on his nightly live show. Stop the Steele protesters and organizers, and also election-related conspiracy theorists also made appearances both before and after January the 6th. None of them, nor any of the other far-right extremists, were pressed on their views. Whether Poole had purposely downplaying his guests' beliefs or prior acts was either he was either not aware of or really alter the resulting impact. By definition, YouTube is a platform that can blur the lines between rigorous interview and pals hanging out online. Consciously or not, the end result is actually just amplifying someone else's ideas behind the facade of an interview, said Lewis. In private, such distinctions seem to evaporate entirely. Poole was in Berkeley, California in September of 2017 for Free Speech Week, an ultimately cancelled 4-day event organized by Milo Yiannopoulos, Diana Lombardo, and the director of White Noise, a 2020 documentary featuring white nationalists like Richard Spencer. It was in town during a preliminary speech at an Airbnb rented by a handful of right-wing figures. Lombardo drew the ire of Poole and Benjamin, that's Sargon of Akkad, a YouTuber and a staunch anti-feminist who told jokes about raping a member of the British Parliament. Yes, let's bring up that classic classic one. Yeah, of course. Sargon himself claims to be, quote, a classic libertarian. Yes, just a classic libertarian who just happens to have all these really right-wing views and to really agree with all the conservatives, but he's a classical libertarian. So the two of them were just a nightmare, Lombardo told the Daily Beast. Their behavior was really vicious, he said. Both were repeatedly calling him fake news and evil because he worked for a mainstream news outlet. When Lombardo took out release forms, that's when Tim Poole really lost his mind, the filmmaker said. He described Poole as loudly and vehemently arguing that he was not going to be trusted, saying that release forms shouldn't be signed. Asking participants not to sign a release form is standard practice when filming a documentary. Benjamin did not respond to an email request for comment. Later that night, Lombardo recalled Benjamin stridently rallying against media coverage of race and equality issues, with Poole concurring. That doesn't surprise me from Benjamin, and to be honest, doesn't surprise me now with Poole. The media was lying to the public and focusing on these issues in order to purposely start a race war in America, he said. They kept saying that. In addition, in 2019, the comment made to Johnson, his ex-black employee, Poole also told a former Fusion staffer about a race war soon to come. So evidently he clearly has an obsession with that. These associations continue to this day. In the record in September, the conversation, Poole confessed to his then colleagues that the former pro-Proud Boys chairman, Taro, privately asked him to delete a tweet and effectively provided cover for the far-right street gang on the 7th of September 2020, where a man wearing a Proud Boy t-shirt was caught on camera bludgeoning a leftist counter-protester in Salem, Oregon. At first, Poole condemned the Proud Boys on Twitter, but Taro sent Poole a message saying that the alleged perpetrator was not a Proud Boy. "You're going to get my dudes hurt," he claimed, Taro told him. At the request, and perhaps without checking to see if Taro was even correct, Poole deleted that tweet and posted a new one, wrongfully telling his hundreds of thousands of followers, without disclosing where this info came from, that the Proud Boys did not seem to be involved. Currently, Poole boasts more than, again, 841,000 followers. That's insane. Of course, 5 weeks later, Poole hosted him, Taro, for a friendly sit-down. And in private, Poole had offered a much more pointed and accurate assessment of the Proud Boys than he would ever deliver on air. It sounds like their effing whole existence is predicated on showing up where Antifa is to start fights and then complaining they're being attacked, he said in the recorded conversation. Though critical of the gang for attending the same protest as the leftists, Poole has asserted that the Proud Boys acted in self-defense 9 out of 10 times. Wow, covering for the Proud Boys there, Tim. As of writing, dozens of Proud Boys have been arrested to date for their roles in the Capitol insurrection. One arrested Capitol writer, though not a Proud Boy, used a photo of himself wearing a Tim Poole t-shirt as an avatar and has since deleted his Twitter profile in July of 2020. During these initial years as an independent act, Poole did not attract in any way much of this attention. That changed when he parted and he embarked on a joint effort with Paul Joseph Watson, a YouTuber and conspiracy theorist. Then President Trump made a speech in April 2017, partly devoted to wailing about the non-existent terrorist act in Sweden. Swedes were confused, to say the least. Watson then entered the fray. Regardless of whether Trump had fudged the details, migrants and refugees to him posed a serious threat. Watson and Alex Jones' acolyte opined, as so did much of the time of a lot of the online far right in the US, to those criticizing him. Watson proposed footing the bill for any reporter who spent a week investigating the crime-ridden suburbs of Marlow. The idea that migrants and, quote, non-white migrants bring crime and squalor with them is a long-standing white nationalist trope. Only one journalist actually took Watson up on his offer, Tim Pool, who was already planning a reporting trip prior to Watson's challenge. And the $2,000 from Watson was added to a successful $20,000 GoFundMe campaign. The title said, Investigating Swedish Crime Waves. In the description, he swore that he'd only report the facts and not take sides. The final product did not bear this out. In a dozen odd videos, you can see how and why Poole began appealing to a right-leaning audience. The patina of authenticity and objectivity masking a deep-seated bias, conveniently omitting context briefing an alt-right-wing narrative, and honestly towards a press fact-checking of his assertions. Not surprised. Poole should be subpoenaed in the January 6th hearings. Not really, but he maybe. I mean, if they tie him to it, then maybe he should be. Oh yeah, that's the. That is actually a fantastic interview debate, by the way. Sam Cedar absolutely annihilates Poole. Like I say, Sam Cedar, who is someone who knows deeply the political knowledge and the goings on in America, and he just wallops all over Tim Poole when Tim Poole starts talking. But starts literally, Sam Cedar's like, "What you want about? That's not true," because this and this, and he just absolutely wallops him. So, in Rackenby, a suburb of Stockholm, Poole hunkered down in a bowling alley to gab with three men whom Poole says he just happened to meet. During their chat, the men aired suspicions about the recent influx of refugees while praising Trump. As the Swedish press and leftist YouTubers like Hey It's Vadim, by the way, go watch that video from Hey It's Vadim, it's fantastic, previously documented that all these men were not locals. They did not reside in the area at all, but rather were members of the Folksgang die Föreningen, aka the Free People's Movement, an anti-immigration far-right fringe group whose leader has blamed the Jews for both the Holocaust and 9/11, among many other conspiracies. During a Reddit AMA 10 days after the video was posted, the user informed Poole about his interview subjects and the Freer's extremist beliefs. Poole did not seem troubled. "I was introduced to them as from Rackenby," he replied. The description in his video has not been updated. And of course, the members were not the only far-right individuals Poole has failed to accurately depict. When introduced to Ivar Apari, Poole says he's a journalist who has a really good perspective, but it might be controversial. And what are those controversials might be? Poole doesn't say. Apari is a far-right columnist, I'm going to call him communist then, columnist, who later opined that Google search results are manipulated to serve blacks and gays while harming white heterosexuals. Wow, what a character. What a character. I'm sure Tim Poole finds his views perfectly fine. Wow. Like I say, hanging out, it shocks you. It really just shocks you how all these centrists hang out with all these far-right extremists. they're just hanging out with all these, far right extremists. It's not, suspicious in any way. What's the old adage? Judge a person by the company they keep. So, Chang Frink, Chang Frink, who served as Poole's guide in a couple of videos, is also described by Poole as a controversial and aligned with the right wing. And according to some people, but others say he's a good journalist. Viewers are not informed that Frink held political office as a member of the Swedish Democrats, a far-right anti-immigration party, as BuzzFeed reported. Or that a high-ranking party official prodded Fredrik to found Nyheter Indag, a right-wing news site, a year after Poole's visit. The outlet was named a leading purveyor of junk news, according to an Oxford University study, a charge that Frink has disputed. Poole told BuzzFeed in 2017 he wasn't aware of Frink's affiliations. Gee, Tim Poole sure doesn't seem to know a lot about these people he's interviewing. He sure doesn't seem to know a lot. So, identifying left-leaning interviewees wasn't a problem. When Poole talked with Niels Carlson, Mars deputy mayor, he framed Carlson's response that refugees were not responsible for the increase in violent crime as coming from someone with a very liberal perspective, he said. When caught the corrective media's eye, however, was a scene where Poole and Fredrik were lying about in a shopping centre in Rakeby, where they suddenly had to beat a very hasty retreat. Poole claimed he was instructed to leave the area and escorted out by the cops, as up to 50 unarmed men could possibly show up and begin pelting them with rocks. The Stockholm police called the allegation bunk. A small group of individuals made it clear that they didn't want to be filmed, and Poole was not escorted out. But that did not stop Poole's tale of imminent peril from being trumpeted by the likes of Watson himself, Breitbart, the Daily Mail, the Surprise, the Daily Wire, and then even the Daily Stormer. So following the Swedish excursion, Poole began to abandon the on-the-ground reporting and shift almost entirely to commentary. The death threats he claimed to have received from the left wing were a deciding factor, he said. A second YouTube channel, the Timcast News, was created in November 2017 and included less polished work, said Poole, and addressed a wider range of cultural topics like technology, skateboarding, and initially not much was posted. By July, pace had picked up. Poole, and of course, did not branch much beyond the culture war battles, but over time, he settled on a reliable, scalable, and often cost-efficient format. In each video, he'd read a newsworthy article out loud, pausing to add his own opinions, cite social media, other sources, and riff. So how far are we down? Oh, we've still got a ways to go on this article. We've still got a ways to go. We've still got a ways to go, but yeah. I think you get the point by this. I think you get the point, and like I say, I would definitely encourage you to read all of this. Like I say, I think it's very, very interesting the way this goes. But of course, I think we've run out of time. We've been going over this for 2 hours now, but I think you get the picture. Tim Poole is a bit of a dim for. And I've already decided what we're doing next week. We're going to cover the policies of the English Libertarian and the Scottish Libertarian parties, because oh my, oh my, are they a riot? Oh my, are they an absolute riot? Literally. So, like I say, do watch out for that next week. I will post as a normal Monday when it's going to be. Obviously, I'll make the live stream go up. Please do remember to hit that bell if you are on YouTube and you have enjoyed it, because you will get a notification about it. But yes, obviously, of course, the Good Morning Walk as well on Saturday will be hopefully, fingers crossed, going ahead. We are probably expecting rain and thunderstorms. I will let you know if it goes ahead or not. Hopefully it will, fingers crossed. Other than that, like I say, as always, thank you all for watching. Thank you very much for the people who've super chatted as well. Like I say, if you do want to support the channel, there are links down below to my Patreon, or you can buy me a coffee. Like I say, thank you very much to everyone who does support me that way. And like I say to everyone else, thank you very much for joining us. Like I say, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, as is always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time. And like I say, see you all hopefully Saturday morning live. Like I say, we'll have obviously videos as well coming out during the week as well, so watch out for them as well. So, as always, have a good evening, and yes, enjoy. And like I say, please do finish off reading this article, because it is, as you can see, very illuminating to who Tim Pool is. And if you know someone who is a Tim Pool fan, then you should definitely send them this article and see what they think about Tim Pool after reading this particular article. So, as always, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you all very soon.